I just remembered that Ernestine actually was a sociologist, not a psychologist, which doesn't really matter anyway because it's a theoretical approach and those are both based in social sciences, but just wanted to point that out. Next, I'm going to be turning towards more contemporary views of love. And specifically, I wanted to focus on, again, one of my favorite theories, attachment theory. We've already talked about attachment theory in infancy and to some degree in childhood. And back then, we also talked about how eventually our attachment figures become our best friends, let's say in adolescence, and or romantic partners, maybe parents too for a while. But eventually, the attachment theory proposes that our attachment figures become our romantic partners pretty much solely. There is just an abundance of research on attachment in romantic relationships. I would imagine there's almost as much research on romantic relationships as there is an attachment theory on infants. And so this is still a burgeoning area of research, one with lots of questions that still need to be tackled. One of the things that's interesting, we already when we talked about attachment in infancy, we talked about attachment styles, and we still have attachment styles in adulthood, but they go by different names. So, for example, here you could see that preoccupied or ambivalent, this is going to be more like the resistant child, the child in the strange situation who like just couldn't get enough love, so would actively push away the parent after the parent returned, even though the parent was the one that caused them distress. I'll talk about what these look like in adults in just a second. We have avoidance still, but we use the term dismissive more in adults. So this is like the child who doesn't show emotion, but is still feeling emotion and is still worked up, but they don't seem to show it. And secure. There is a classification for the disorganized type, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We'll just talk about these three. So, a preoccupied adult is somebody who is insecure, and obviously, this is measuring security versus insecurity, but a person who falls in love pretty quickly, like they seem to just fall head over heels and deeply in love very, very quickly, seems to always need the partner, like always wants them around, might be checking in on them, but often ends up feeling rejected or feeling unfulfilled. This is, again, somebody who wants the love but just can't get enough. So just like we saw in childhood, it's very similar behaviors, even if the attachment figure is different. Instead of a parent, it's a romantic partner. For the person who gets a classification as avoidant or dismissive, also insecure, and similar to that infant, doesn't show emotions as much, more withholding. Somebody who finds it hard to connect to people or hard to get close to somebody else. Maybe reluctant to engage with that romantic partner, somebody who really wants to be independent, and I mean independent broadly, so including emotional independence. And then a secure individual is fully open to love, firmly committed, doesn't have an issue showing emotions and also being a support person for someone else. I wouldn't say necessarily falls in love quickly, but it's not impossible or hard to fall in love, again, with the right person. Just like secure children, the most optimal outcomes are associated with being secure. So in romantic relationships, this is only the tip of the iceberg in the findings, but secure individuals are more likely to report having happier marriages that are also more satisfying. They tend to just be better partners and more sensitive to the partner's needs. If mistakes happen or problems happen in the relationship, secure individuals are more likely to be forgiving. So overall, many more positive associations with security. In class, we had a student, I think it was Camille, if I remember correctly, who asked, like, are we always the same attachment style and from infancy through the rest of our lives? And my response then was like, yeah, there is some stability, but we also know that things can change. So for example, if you're going into a relationship perhaps is one of those insecure attachments with one of those insecure attachment styles, it is definitely the case that depending on the quality of the relationship you have with the romantic partner, that can switch to more of a secure attachment style. Not not overnight, right? This isn't like some kind of miracle, but over time. So yes, attachment styles can change. They are pretty resistant to change overall, and they are pretty stable, but they can change over time. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about marriage. So just taking a romantic relationship to the next step. If we were in class, and again starting this lecture on marriage, I would ask you as a class to talk about how you think marriage has changed over time. And before reading the rest of the slide, although maybe your eyes are already glazed over those words, but just how has marriage changed over time? How do you think a, person who's in their current 20s or 30s, how does their marriage look compared to maybe your parents' marriage, or if they were married, or grandparents again if they were married? How has marriage changed? There's been a lot of research on this, and there's not one, answer. There are lots of different answers. But what I wanted to focus on specifically is this idea that many people argue that marriage as a whole doesn't have the same kind of weight to it, or the idea that it's become deinstitutionalized. And what essentially that means is that it used to be viewed as like the standard right of adulthood, a standard adult institution, something that you just do as an adult. And now it's transformed from that into more of this optional choice that marriage doesn't have to be for everyone. And this doesn't mean that you don't have a romantic partner, perhaps a romantic partner that you live with. We'll talk about more about that in just a second. But it doesn't mean like you either need the legal papers saying, hey, I'm married, and or for those people who are religious, that religious aspect either. So what I mean by deinstitutionalize is, again, moving from this standard right of adulthood into something that becomes more optional. So as part of this deinstitutionalization, we do see that there are more and more people, and we'll talk more about this in just a second when we get to divorce, that are getting divorced or have had multiple divorces. So this standard right of marriage is just something you do and something you stick with for life is now different. There are more and more people who are also living alone, and for some individuals this is a choice. So it's not a situation where like I can't find a romantic partner, but hey, I am strong, independent, I could do all of these things without a partner. Maybe I'm my best self without a partner, and again, an optional choice. Part of marriage and the reason why people were getting married, and staying in those relationships may have been for children or for the sake of children. And so now, again, going back to this deinstitutionalization idea that more and more people are having babies without being married, before marriage, or without marriage in general. If we go back, I mean, quite a bit, but let's say for our grandparents, then it was a case that if the woman in the US dared to get pregnant without her spouse or without having a spouse, there were places where women who were unwed mothers were sent to. They were shipped to homes for unwed mothers. And in fact, this actually happened to my grandma, who got pregnant when she was a teenager, and she wasn't married. So she was sent away to so that her baby bump wouldn't be shown, and eventually that baby was given up for adoption. Or we could talk about the idea of the shotgun marriage or shotgun wedding, where people who, got pregnant were forced to get married to the person, who impregnated them or who they impregnated, because that's just what you do. Like if you're going to have a baby, you have to have a marriage too. Are there still people in the US and around the world where these rules apply? Absolutely. But by and large, we see a lot of people who are getting pregnant without having a spouse, and again, aren't being treated that way by most of society. Roughly about 20 and 50 babies, or 2 out of 5 women have babies out of wedlock. I don't want you to know that specific figure just because it's going to vary from sample to sample, but know that quite a few babies are born outside of this institution of marriage. And of course, this varies by culture, but just thinking about how marriage has changed over time is it's quite substantial. There are more and more people who are deciding to cohabitate, meaning that they're living with a romantic partner. That relationship is deep and just as important in terms of a marriage. But for various reasons, they may choose not to get married or financially can't afford to get married. Lots and lots of different reasons. I still want to say though that when we look at the research and for people who are, young people thinking about what do you want eventually, what's your ideal, cohabitation and staying single still are less appealing than getting married. So 8 and 10, it's not so important that you know the number, but just that it's sizable, do plan on being married one day. So even though lots of people are choosing cohabitation or staying single, and maybe that's in the moment, maybe this is something that's happening in emerging adulthood while you're trying to find yourself, one day when they think about their end goal, most people are saying that marriage is a part of that end goal.